This is Reverend Kirk Lawton, minister at Ocean Lakes Family Campground, and this is our podcast. Our prayer is that this message may enrich your life as you find God especially meaningful to you. Thank you for worshiping with us. Several years ago, a man who was then the executive vice president of a large corporation spoke at the morning service of a church in Florida. His opening sentence was one which he gave with slow and deliberate earnestness. It was obvious he had given much thought to what he had said. Here was that statement: "The good things in life have to be paid for in advance, while the evil things we do are paid for generally on the installment plan." There's an old proverb which says, "Take what you want in life and then pay the price." This past week, we've heard many comments about freedom in America and how freedom must be won every day. We can't take that for granted. I think one of the hardest lessons of all the lessons we have to learn in life is that for every good thing we get, the price has to be paid. Life runs no bargain sales. Everything worth having has on it a price tag. There are no cut rates, no bonuses thrown in. We've celebrated this past week Independence Day. And even though that day is past now, it's still an appropriate time for us to stop and take stock of the blessings that God's given to us. This morning I want us to look at two truths. First, I want us to look at this from a negative side, that God is not mocked. Whatsoever we sow, we shall reap. What about the evil things? These are the things that have to be paid for on the installment plan. In the Old Testament, we see a man named David, one who was called a man after God's own heart. But for all the good in David's life, David had a great sin. He found that there was a high price tag on that sin, and he paid the price, but paid for it on the installment plan. When the first installment came due, Nathan the prophet, the man of God, stood before David and told David the story of a rich man who took the ewe lamb that belonged to a poor man. David, deeply stirred, thundered at Nathan. He said, "Show me that man and I will punish him." Whereupon Nathan pointed his finger straight at the heart of David and answered, I believe, with those calm yet scorching words, "Thou art the man." Before long, there was another installment due. And this time, Absalom, David's favorite son, had Ammon, his half-brother, killed. With a breaking heart, David let Absalom remain in exile for 3 long years. Then when Absalom returned from exile and plotted to overthrow David, his father, that plot failed. Not long after the battle was over, a runner came to tell David that Absalom was now buried under a pile of rocks, with his body full of wounds from spears and 3 darts in his heart. Another payment on the installment plan had come due for David. Sometimes these installments come close together. There's another story in the Old Testament about a man named Haman, the chief prince of Ahasuerus, who became very much upset when Mordecai, a gatekeeper, would not bow down when Haman passed by on the street. That's what he was supposed to do. He was ordered to do. So Haman was furious when Mordecai would not bow down before him. So Haman planned to have all the Jewish people put to death. He also planned a special death for Mordecai, a hanging in the backyard of the palace on a specially built scaffold 75 feet high. The first installment of his wickedness fell due. The king discovered that Mordecai had earlier been instrumental in saving the king's life, and he had never been honored for that. So the king ordered Mordecai to be dressed in royal robes, a crown on his head, a royal scepter in his hand, riding on a white horse, and he was to be led down the street in a parade to honor him. And guess who it was who was to walk along leading the horse? You got it, Haman. Well, the final installment on Haman's sin came rather quickly. The king discovered Haman's wicked plot to have all the Jews killed, and so the king ordered that Haman be hanged on the scaffold he had built for Mordecai. There are many other examples of this truth, that evil things we do are paid for on the installment plan. Moving from biblical illustrations, we can come on down even to our day, modern times. There was an issue some time ago of the Journal of the American Medical Association that described the birth of a 5-pound baby girl. At birth, this little baby was limp, had a sloping forehead, low-set ears, a broad nose with a prominent bridge. Her left hand had only a thumb and 3 fingers. Part of a 6th finger was attached to the right hand. Her right foot showed a slight deformity. Later examination revealed 11 pairs of thin ribs and dislocation of both hips. This little girl died with severe respiratory distress at the age of 9 hours. An autopsy showed abnormalities of the heart, kidneys, lungs, liver, pancreas, and digestive tract. What caused all this malformation? Medical scientists, in their own cautious way, were slow to affirm a direct causal relationship. But they did find that 9 months before this little girl was conceived, her mother had taken 3 doses of a very powerful illegal drug. The father had taken only 2 doses of that drug a few years before. Roy Angel, a great minister of some days gone by, tells about a young boy who lived on a farm. He wanted to go fishing one day, but his father said that he'd first have to plant a whole bucket full of beans, 2 beans to the hill. The ground was already prepared, and this boy was to plant the beans. So he went out, obeying his father faithfully at first. He planted 2 beans to each hill of dirt. But then he thought he could finish faster if he added a 3rd bean. And so he began putting 3 beans to each hill rather than 2. This still didn't go fast enough for him, so he began dumping a handful in each hill. And when he got to the end of that row, he finally dumped all he had left in his bucket in just 1 hole, and then the boy went fishing. Sometime later, the father asked his son if he would go with him. "Let's see how the beans are coming up, son." All looked fine for several rows, but then the bean sprouts became more plentiful, and when they got to that last row, it looked like a genuine bean forest. Father said, "Son, I want to talk to God for just a minute." So the 2 of them bowed their heads right there in the field, and the father prayed a prayer which went something like this: "Dear God, I don't mind losing a crop of beans if you'll teach my son that the beans always come up in life. Teach him, Lord, that he'll always reap what he sows." That's exactly what our text for today says. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. I heard once about a man from Lexington, Kentucky, who told about a rather strange experience he had had. So he and some of his friends had heard of others who had a lot of fun at a masquerade party where they all dressed up in crazy outfits. Now, the place for this party was at the home of someone who lived some distance out of town, down a country road. This man said, "I decided to dress up for that party like the devil. I put on a red devil outfit, complete with horns, tail. I carried a pitchfork. Well, the distance to the house wasn't all that far, so I decided to walk. and have some fun along the way, letting people see my devil costume. But before I got to the house where the party was going to be, a storm came up. And I was walking along, but I needed a place to get inside, out of the weather. So I darted into a little building beside the road. It just so happened that it was a little country church. And they were right in the middle of a revival meeting when I got there. You can just imagine what commotion it caused when I appeared at the front door with my devil outfit on. People started screaming and running. They went out the back door, out the side door, out the windows, any place they could get out. One fella right up toward the front jumped up, but he got his coat tail caught in the pew, and he couldn't get away. So as I walked toward him, he threw both arms up in the air and he said, "I've been a member of this church for 25 years, but I want you to know, Satan, that I've been on your side the whole time." Well, that's the way it is sometimes, I guess. The evil things we have to do, that we do, are paid for generally on the installment plan. Now let's move on quickly from the negative side of this question to the positive side. When we read, "Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap," this applies also to the good things. This business executive who was speaking said the good things of life have to be paid for in advance. You who are members of a certain church, whatever the denomination, perhaps in your church you have elected people to serve in places of leadership. Why did you elect those people? Because they looked good, wore nice clothes? No. It's because you trusted them, you examined them, and you felt that they were examples of following Christ in their conduct. You knew that their lives adorned the gospel of Christ. Well, how long did it take for these people to earn your confidence? One day? A week? The truth would probably be closer if we said that it took years of faithful example, stewardship, the right kind of living before they won your approval. Only then were you willing to place them in a position of honor and leadership. You see, the good things are paid for in advance. Somebody put it this way: we need to plant trees under whose shade we may never sit. This same truth applies in friendships. All of us want to have friends, don't we? But we can't have these unless we're willing to pay the price, and the price must be paid in advance. There's the sharing of joys, sorrows, doing things for your friends, filling your life with small things that enrich your friendship. True and lasting friendship then follows. Look at this same truth in the realm of marriage. Everybody who says "I do" wants to have a happy marriage, but not everyone is willing to pay the price. It's when both husband and wife are willing to continue offering to each other expressions of love, when they are both attentive to each other's needs, when they make constant efforts to be a good companion, then the outcome is a happy marriage. A happy marriage, though, has to be paid for in advance. It does not automatically become a happy marriage at the wedding ceremony. Happiness is a result of the seeds that are sown. Whatsoever we sow, that shall we also reap, the scripture says. Now, having tried to hammer in the truth that the good things of life have to be paid for in advance, while the evil things are paid for on the installment plan, I want to come before we stop to make one exception to all I've just said. This is in our relationship with Jesus Christ. Here and here alone, we can never pay for in advance what we receive. Yes, the price has to be paid, but Jesus has already done that for us. Therefore, we don't have to. The only price as such that we can pay is to render ourselves to Him. Surrender. Bishop Arthur Moore of the Methodist Church once told about a man who attended a revival service where the bishop was preaching. This man seemed to be all out of sorts. The bishop said he was one of the most miserable looking men I ever saw in my life. In church service, he never opened a hymnal, never took part at all in the service. He slipped down in the seat until his chin rested on his chest, Unhappiness was written all over that man's face. During one of the services, Bishop Moore asked the pastor in a whisper, what's this man's trouble? The pastor said, I can tell you, it's a good story. Why don't you let him tell you? So when Bishop Moore, the service was over and he was able to get this man off alone, Bishop asked him that question. The man explained, Bishop, I want to be a Christian worse than anything in this world. But here's my trouble. You see, I was brought up in Chicago, sleeping in boxcars and empty sheds, half frozen most of the time, hungry about all the time. While out there on the lake nearby, I could see beautiful yachts everywhere, and the rich people living in those yachts threw overboard scraps of food that made me drool. I was so hungry. Sometimes I got so mad until I couldn't even see. And I vowed that one day when I grew up, I was going to anchor my own yacht out there, and it was going to be the biggest yacht on that lake. Today, the man explained to Bishop Moore, I'm in a position to make that dream come true, or I will be in just a few weeks. You see, I'm a rich man now, and I own 2 big farms out in Kansas. And when those crops are harvested, I'm going to sell them and the farms, and I'm going to buy that yacht that I've been wanting all my life. So when the man finished his story, Bishop Moore looked at him rather puzzled and said, well, what does all that have to do with your becoming a Christian? So the man explained, Bishop, don't you see? If I surrender my life to God, he might want me to sell those farms and crops and give the money to the church, wouldn't he? Bishop replied, well, he might and he might not. But anyway, you ought not to accept his salvation till you're willing to give God all that you have and are, if he wants it. A few days later in the revival, when the invitation hymn was sung, this man walked down the aisle and knelt at the altar. Bishop went quickly beside him and knelt down, and he heard this man pray something like this. Lord, you can have those farms. You can have the crops. You can have everything I own. You can have me if you'll just forgive my sins and give me peace down in my heart. In the services after that, this man sat near the front of the church, not at the back. He sang the hymns. He entered into the service. He reflected a real sense of peace and joy in his face. On the last day, as the people stood out in front of the church after the service, somebody brought a telegram up to this man. That was many years ago. They didn't have the cell phones then. But they brought him a telegram, this new Christian man. He read the message on the telegram, and all he said was, When the bishop asked if it was bad news, he just handed the preacher the telegram. It was from the manager of his farms out in Kansas. And here's what the message said. Millions of grasshoppers out here. We have kept them off with fires and drums and tin pans. Come immediately and take charge. I won't accept further responsibility. Bishop Moore said to him, well, are you going? The new Christian man said, no. Why not? Asked the bishop. And the man explained, you see, I gave those farms and those crops to the Lord. They belong to him. Those grasshoppers belong to him too, and if God wants to pasture his grasshoppers on his corn and wheat, that's okay with me. The bishop said, I stood there with my mouth wide open in astonishment. I did not quite agree with his practical theology, but his surrender to God was perfect. The price paid on our salvation, it's already been paid. All we can do is to accept God's free gift. Many, many years ago, 4 young men were standing in the yard of a certain college campus. As they stood there, a dilapidated, worn-out old car rattled up the road. One of those boys looked closely at that car, and then he broke from the crowd, and he made a dash for the car. He jumped in the car in the passenger side as it slowed down, and when it came to a stop, this boy called to his friends over and introduced all of them to the man who was driving the car. It was his own father. A sack of apples and several other things were in the back seat, gifts from back home. And after a visit of an hour or two, the old car rattled away back to the boys' home on the farm. As the boy's dad left, one of the boy's friends said jokingly, not maliciously, but just in good humor, "That's a mighty poor excuse of a car your dad's driving. You reckon he'll make it back home in that vehicle?" The son answered with deep feeling, very seriously, "I love every rattle in that old car. You see, my father is sending me to college with money he might have used to buy an expensive new car for himself." Why would a father make such a sacrifice as that? There's only one word. Only one word will explain it. That word lies at the very center of Christianity. John made that word live and take root in our lives when he wrote, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Of all the blessings that we have, not only this past week, but in the days ahead, surely the greatest gift from God we've ever received is the gift of his Son. Would you pray with me for just a moment? Dear Lord, may we never forget for a single moment the great price that Jesus paid for our salvation. Yes, Jesus paid it all. All to him we owe. Thank you, God, for loving us like that. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.